My parents pressured me into paying my sister's wedding debt, then kicked me out, so I walked away and never looked back at their lies. I'm a 27-year-old guy, and I've always been the responsible one in my family. Growing up, it felt like my entire life was built around other people's expectations, while my own dreams were shoved to the side. My parents, well, they were controlling, materialistic, and somehow always found a way to make me feel like I was falling short. They had this weird obsession with appearances, with money, with showing the world that their family was perfect, especially my younger sister, Emma. She was their golden child, charming, talented, and utterly untouchable in their eyes. I worked multiple jobs through high school and college, juggling shifts at a cafe, tutoring kids, and even helping my uncle with his small business. I thought it was normal, responsible even. Meanwhile, Emma floated through life as if the world owed her everything. Parents funded her shopping sprees, her hobbies, even her impulsive little trips abroad, and no one ever seemed to question it. I remember sitting at the dinner table one night when Emma was showing off her latest project at university. Mom clapped and said, "I don't know how you do it, Emma. You're so gifted and like your brother who's, well, just doing what's expected." Dad nodded, as if my late nights and endless side jobs didn't matter at all. I forced a smile, nodded along, and pretended it didn't sting. I loved my family and I wanted peace more than I wanted validation. I told myself it was fine that I was lucky to be part of a family that cared, even if their care came with conditions. But deep down, I felt a knot forming in my chest every time they praised Emma over me. I'd start thinking, why am I always the one paying my dues while she gets to coast? It was subtle at first, just little comparisons here and there, but it built up like a storm behind my ribs. By the end of that week, I couldn't shake this uneasy feeling. Something was coming, a request, a favor that I knew I wouldn't be able to say no to. And for the first time, I wondered if my so-called family loyalty would actually cost me more than I was ready to give. A few weeks later, the conversation I'd been dreading finally came. Emma was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone like nothing mattered, while Mom and Dad perched on either side of her, grinning like it was some big family announcement. "So," Mom began, her voice sweet, but with that sharp edge I'd learned to recognize, "Emma and her fiancé are planning a wedding. It's going to be very special." I nodded politely, keeping my tone neutral. "That's great," I said. I had no problem with her getting married. What I didn't expect was what came next. Dad leaned forward, resting a hand on my shoulder. "Of course, it's a big occasion, and as the responsible one in the family, we thought it would be natural for you to handle most of the wedding expenses." Froze. My mind raced. Handle most of the expenses? I opened my mouth, but Mom jumped in before I could respond. "You've always been so reliable. Emma's lucky to have a brother who can step up. Don't you agree?" Her smile didn't reach her eyes. It was the kind of smile that made you feel guilty before you've even thought about saying no. I swallowed. I guess," I murmured, trying to buy time, trying to figure out if this was a joke. But it wasn't. Every glance between them screamed expectation, not suggestion. Every sigh from Emma was a reminder that she was completely at ease. Trusting that I would pick up the tab without complaint, I remember sitting there, feeling a knot of dread tighten in my stomach. "But I mean, I've got my own bills, rent, car, savings." I began, but Dad waved it off like my words were invisible. "We've supported you all these years. Think of this as giving back. It's family." Family. That word hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I wanted to scream, to tell them I was tired of being everyone's financial safety net. But I stayed silent. I smiled weakly, nodding along as they detailed every little expense. Venue, catering, decorations, photographer. It all added up to more money than I had ever imagined spending by the end of the conversation. I felt that old knot twist even tighter. I knew I'd say yes. And I had no idea just how much they were going to take from me or how it would change everything over the next few weeks. I started paying the wedding expenses. It began with smaller things, a deposit for the venue, a few bills for catering, but it didn't take long for it to snowball into something I couldn't ignore. Every time I transferred money or wrote a check, I felt a little piece of myself being chipped away. And every time I hesitated, Mom or Dad would casually remind me of my responsibilities, or Emma would flash that perfect, oblivious smile like I was lucky to be part of her life. I remember one evening, sitting at my desk, scrolling through the invoices, trying to make sense of the numbers. "You've got to see this, Emma," I said, showing her the breakdown of what I'd already spent. She barely glanced up. "Wow, thanks," she said casually, scrolling through her phone. No excitement, no gratitude. Just by the time we got into the thick of wedding planning, I was footing nearly every major expense. The venue alone had cost more than I'd ever paid for anything in my life. Catering, decorations, photographer, even some of the dresses and suits they kept finding ways to push me into paying. And the worst part? They acted like I was lucky to be helping. One evening I confronted my parents gently. "This is getting a bit much." I didn't realize I'd be covering almost everything. I tried to keep my voice calm, rational, but Mom just smiled and shook her head.
"Oh, don't be silly."
"It's for your sister. She deserves it, and honestly, you're so responsible. We trust you." Dad leaned back, adding, "Besides, it's expected. Family steps up. Expected." That word hit me like a punch. Expected. I was exhausted, financially drained, and emotionally stretched thin. And for what? A wedding that everyone would remember except me. Every time I saw Emma laughing with her friends, I felt invisible. Like I was just a ghost floating around her perfect day. One night, I went to my bedroom after another long day of transfers and bills, rubbing my temples. I could hear them downstairs laughing about some minor wedding drama I'd just resolved. I sat on my bed and let myself think, why am I the only one sacrificing anything? Why do I feel like I'm being used? The realization sank in slowly, like a stone sliding down my chest. They weren't asking for help. They were exploiting me. I'd been groomed to pay, groomed to stay quiet, groomed to take all the responsibility while everyone else got the glory. And yet I told myself it was okay. I had to keep the peace. For the family, for Emma, for the idea of loyalty I'd been raised on. But deep down, I couldn't shake this feeling that something was about to tip, that my patience was about to run out, and when it did, everything would change. The wedding day finally arrived, and it was everything my parents promised: lavish, over the top, and completely fueled by my bank account. The venue was sparkling, the catering impeccable, and Emma was radiant, as if the world revolved around her. Guests gushed, "What a perfect wedding," and I forced a smile, watching everyone praise her while silently tallying all the money I'd spent. I remember walking past the reception hall, catching glimpses of Emma laughing with her friends, completely unaware, or maybe completely indifferent about the sacrifices I'd made. I tried to focus on the little things, the floral arrangements I'd picked, the decorations I'd helped fund, but it felt hollow, meaningless, like my efforts were invisible. Like I was just a ghost floating behind the scenes of someone else's perfect day. Mom and Dad were in their element, basking in the compliments, and every so often, they'd throw me a glance, a subtle nod, a faint smile, as if to say, "See? You did your part." It wasn't pride. It was ownership. And the more I noticed it, the tighter the knot in my chest became. At one point, Kama's new husband came over, clinking his glass. "Thanks for everything you've done for the wedding," he said casually. I nodded, trying to hide the sharp edge in my voice. Of course, it's family. But inside I felt a storm of frustration. Family, that word again. They had turned it into a weapon. By the end of the night, I was exhausted, not from the work, but from the emotional weight. I retreated to a quiet corner, letting the laughter and chatter wash over me while I thought about everything I'd given. Every penny, every hour, every ounce of energy. And yet not one person had truly noticed, not Emma, not Mom, not Dad, as I watched the happy couple dance. I realized something chilling. This wasn't gratitude. It was expectation. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning of a much larger story, one that would test me in ways I couldn't yet imagine. I thought the worst was over after the wedding. I thought maybe finally I could breathe, but I was dead wrong. A week later, Mom called me into the living room, her voice deceptively sweet. "We need to talk about the wedding expenses." I froze. "We already went over that," I said cautiously, feeling that familiar pit in my stomach. Dad leaned back in his chair, smiling, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yes, well, after reviewing everything, we realized you've overspent." I blinked. "Overspent?" I repeated, my voice shaking. "I paid exactly what we agreed on. Every invoice, every bill, everything. I even tracked it in a spreadsheet." Mom's smile never wavered. "It doesn't matter. You were careless with the money. You didn't consult us for every single decision. That's irresponsible." Then she dropped it like a hammer. "We think it's best. If you find your own place, you can't stay here anymore." I felt like someone had punched me in the chest. My own home, the place I'd grown up in, the people I'd sacrificed everything for, suddenly wasn't mine anymore. I couldn't breathe. You're kicking me out?" I stared. "It's for your own good. You need to learn boundaries."
Boundaries.
That word, the way they wielded it, made my blood boil. I wanted to scream, to throw every bill, every check, every receipt at them. I wanted to tell them exactly how much I'd been manipulated. How every smile, every thank you, every word about family loyalty had been a trap. But I couldn't. I just stood there, trembling, watching them act like I'd done something wrong. I left the room, my hands shaking, my mind racing. I had been treated like a bank account, a servant, and now I was homeless in the eyes of the people I'd trusted most. The reality hit me. Nothing about my family was what it seemed. And for the first time I wondered, was walking away the only choice I had? I thought the worst was over after the wedding. I thought maybe finally I could breathe. But one Saturday afternoon, Mom called me into the living room, her tone that mix of sweetness and steel I knew too well. "We need to talk about the wedding expenses," she said, like she was about to hand me a compliment. I froze. "We already went over all that," I said cautiously, trying to sound calm, even though my chest tightened. Dad leaned back, hands folded, smiling in that way that never reached his eyes. "Yes, well, after reviewing the numbers, we realized you've overspent?" "Overspent?" I repeated, my voice rising without meaning to. "I covered everything we agreed on. Every invoice, every single bill. I even double-checked every transfer." Mom tilted her head, that fake, sympathetic smile plastered across her face. "It doesn't matter. You were careless. You didn't consult us for all the minor decisions. That's irresponsible." I felt my stomach drop. Careless? I made sure everything was paid on time perfectly. My hands clenched into fists. My voice trembled with anger I couldn't release. Then came the kicker, something I never expected. Mom's voice softened, almost patronizing. "We think it's best. If you find your own place, you can't stay here anymore." I froze, disbelief flooding me. You're kicking me out? Just like that?" Dad shrugged, as if shrugging could erase years of sacrifice. "It's for your own good. You need to learn about boundaries." Boundaries. That word felt like a dagger. I wanted to scream, to throw every wedding invoice at them, to make them see what they'd done, how they'd manipulated me, guilted me, used me as a walking ATM, but I couldn't. I just stood there, shaking, staring at the two people I'd trusted my entire life, suddenly realizing they were strangers who had only ever wanted one thing: control. I left the room, my heart pounding, my mind racing, feeling hollow and betrayed. For the first time, I realized that loyalty to my family might cost me everything. And deep down, a small, terrified thought crept in. Maybe walking away was the only option left. I packed my things in silence, each item heavier than the last. Every book, every piece of clothing, every memento from my childhood felt like a reminder of everything I'd given in, everything I'd been denied. I kept thinking, is this really my life now? The home I grew up in, the family I sacrificed for, the countless hours and money I poured into my sister's wedding, It all turned against me. When I stepped out into the evening air, the cool wind hit my face, but it did nothing to ease the storm inside. I had nowhere to go, nowhere to belong. My friends were sympathetic, but sympathy doesn't fill a void. Doesn't erase the feeling of being discarded by the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally. I found myself walking aimlessly through the streets, replaying every conversation, every smile, every family duty they'd thrown at me. My chest ached, and a hollow emptiness settled deep in my stomach. How had it come to this? How had I been groomed to give, only to be kicked out and labeled as careless and ungrateful? By the time I found a bench in a nearly empty park, the tears were streaming down my face. I felt small, insignificant, completely invisible. I had been everything my family wanted: responsible, dependable, generous, and now I was nothing. Just a boy, 27, wandering alone because he'd loved too much. I thought about Emma, about Mom and Dad laughing at some trivial wedding problem without me, and the rage and despair collided inside me. But more than anger, there was a crushing sense of betrayal. I realized that I had spent my entire life trying to earn approval that would never come, trying to meet expectations that were never meant to be fair. And in that moment, sitting on a cold bench with the city lights reflecting off puddles in the street, I hit my absolute low. I had nothing left, no home, no family, no sense of belonging. The only thing I could feel clearly was that something had to change. But I had no idea where to start, or if I even could. The next morning I woke up in a cheap motel, my back stiff from sleeping on a thin mattress, my mind still spinning from the night before. I had no plan, no direction, just a single, glaring truth. I couldn't go back. Not to them, not to that house, not to the people who had turned my loyalty into a weapon against me. For the first time, I felt what it truly meant to be free, even if it came wrapped in loneliness and uncertainty. I found a small apartment later that week. It's barely big enough for a bed and a desk. But it was mine. Mine. I walked through the empty rooms and felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. I could arrange things however I wanted, make decisions without guilt or interference, and, most importantly, breathe without constant manipulation hanging over me. The first few days were hard. Mom and Dad called non-stop, each conversation dripping with guilt trips. "We just want you back," Mom would say, and I could hear the passive-aggressive undertones that had been present my entire life. "You're throwing away family for no reason." But for the first time, I didn't cave. I didn't argue. I didn't justify myself. I simply hung up. Every dollar I spent now was mine, every decision mine, every choice mine. I started small groceries, bills, a few personal treats, but the feeling of autonomy was intoxicating. I even laughed for the first time in weeks, a shaky, almost guilty laugh. But it was real. One night I sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker, and realized something. I was starting over. Not just financially, but emotionally. No one could exploit me anymore. No one could dictate my life or my worth. For the first time, I could finally see a future that wasn't determined by their manipulation. But even as the relief washed over me, I couldn't shake the thought of what was coming next, the moment when they'd realize I wasn't theirs to control. And I knew that reckoning would be inevitable. Living on my own was both terrifying and liberating. At first, every small decision, what to eat, when to sleep, how to pay bills, felt monumental, like the weight of the world rested on my shoulders. But slowly, I began to see the beauty in it. For the first time in my life, I was in charge of my own happiness, my own finances, my own life. No one could guilt me, manipulate me, or make me feel small for being responsible. I spent hours reflecting on everything that had happened, replaying moments with my parents and Emma in my head. It stung, knowing I'd been treated like a tool, that my sacrifices had been invisible. But I realized something important. Their behavior didn't define me. Their unfairness, their favoritism, their lies, they were theirs, not mine. I had the power to break the cycle. I started opening up to close friends, sharing the story I'd buried inside for years. For the first time, I voiced all the anger, all the frustration, all the hurt, and to my surprise, people understood. They didn't pity me, they respected me. They validated my feelings and reminded me that being responsible didn't mean being anyone's punching bag, even as I felt the relief of validation. There was a lingering awareness. Emma and my parents weren't going to change. My sister would likely never acknowledge what she'd done. My parents would continue to see her as perfect while painting me as the problem. That knowledge stung like salt in a wound, but it also solidified my resolve. I didn't need their approval anymore. Sitting on the couch one evening, looking at the bills I now paid on my own, I realized something powerful. Freedom doesn't feel like a luxury, it feels like survival, and survival is just the beginning. I had been pushed to my lowest point, but now I was building a life on my own terms, and soon they would see what it meant to lose control over me completely. A few months into my new life, I started noticing little things about Emma. She had always been carefree, but now, without me handling the bills and logistics for her, cracks were starting to show. Invitations went unpaid. Vendors called back, and her husband began grumbling about money. For the first time, she had to deal with the consequences of the lifestyle my parents had enabled. I won't lie, there was a quiet, almost guilty satisfaction in watching it unfold. Not because I wanted her to fail, but because it highlighted what had been so painfully clear for years. She had relied on me and my sacrifices without a second thought. My parents, too, were flustered, constantly calling me for advice, trying to fix the mess they had helped create, as if I hadn't walked away entirely. One evening, I got a text from Dad. "Emma's wedding bills are becoming a problem. Can you help?" I stared at it for a long time. My thumb hovered over the screen. Part of me wanted to reply to rescue them like I always had, but another, stronger part, the part that had been reborn after weeks of independence, pressed delete. I realized something crucial. I no longer needed their approval, their gratitude, or their acknowledgement. Their little empire of manipulation couldn't reach me anymore. The more I observed Emma and my parents scrambling, the more I felt my own strength solidify. I wasn't vengeful. I was simply untouchable. It was strange watching them struggle from a distance. There were no fireworks, no dramatic confrontations, just life balancing itself out, a quiet justice that didn't require my interference. And while a small part of me felt pangs of sadness for my family, the relief was overwhelming. For the first time, I could breathe without guilt that night. I sat by my apartment window, the city lights twinkling below, and thought, I built this life. I survived the betrayal, the manipulation, the endless expectations. And now, I finally get to live for myself. But even as the calm settled over me, I knew the ultimate confrontation or closure was still ahead. They hadn't learned the last lesson yet. It wasn't until a few months later that I finally saw them in person again. I'd avoided the house, the calls, the guilt trips, but something inside me said it was time. Not to beg, not to argue, not to justify myself. I just needed to assert my boundaries and reclaim the dignity they'd stripped away. When I walked in, Mom and Dad looked startled, almost offended. "What are you doing here?" Mom asked, her voice sharp but faltering slightly. I took a deep breath, holding my head high. I came to say something that should have been said a long time ago. I'm done being manipulated. I'm done being blamed for things that weren't my fault. I'm done being treated like a cash machine and a servant. I'm done. Dad's jaw tightened. "You're being dramatic." "We're your family. I know exactly what family is," I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. Family isn't about control. It isn't about favoritism. It isn't about guilt-tripping the people who love you into paying for someone else's life while pretending it's a gift. You made your choices, and I made mine. I walked away because I finally realized I deserve respect and autonomy. Emma tried to interject, but I held up a hand. "Don't speak. I don't need anyone else's version of my story. You've had years to understand it, and you didn't. So this is it, the first time I felt completely untouchable. I wasn't angry. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was simply standing in my truth, and that alone was powerful." Mom and Dad exchanged a glance. clearly frustrated that their usual tactics didn't work. Emma's face fell, a mix of shock and discomfort. I turned toward the door, feeling lighter than I had in years. I hope someday you understand what it means to take responsibility for your actions. But I'm done waiting for that day. My life is mine now. And with that, I walked out. No shouting, no yelling, no lingering resentment, just closure. For the first time, I felt whole. It's been over a year since I walked away from my family's house. From the manipulation, from the lies, and honestly, I've never felt more alive. Living on my own, making my own decisions, and finally controlling my finances has been liberating in ways I never imagined. Every dollar I earn, every choice I make is for man for the first time. I truly feel proud of myself. I've rebuilt my life piece by piece. The apartment that once felt cramped and scary is now a sanctuary. I've decorated it how I like, filled it with things that bring me joy. And I sleep peacefully at night without the constant anxiety that used to weigh me down. Friends have become my chosen family. It's validating my experiences and reminding me of my worth when I sometimes doubt it. Occasionally I hear about Emma or my parents. Emma's marriage has hit rough patches. And I won't lie, there's a quiet satisfaction in knowing she's starting to face the consequences of relying on others for everything. Mom and Dad have called a few times, but I don't pick up. Their words no longer have power over me. I don't need their approval, their gratitude, or their manipulation. Reflecting on everything, I realized the lesson was never about money. It was about boundaries, self-respect, and realizing that loyalty has limits. I gave everything I could, and when it was taken for granted, I finally had the courage to step away. That step changed everything. Sitting by my window some nights, watching the city lights, I feel a deep sense of peace. I'm no longer the responsible one who gets used. I'm the person who survived, who reclaimed their life, and who finally controls their destiny. I've learned that walking away isn't failure, it's empowerment. And though the past will always be part of me, I no longer let it define me. I am free. I am whole. I am finally living my life on my own terms.